I find if somebody can't come up with a meaning for that traumatic experience, many times we'll revert to a default meaning, like a filler, meaning that bad things just happen, or somehow, some way, I just deserve that traumatic experience in my life. If that's the meaning of that experience that you come away with, of course, it's going to lead you to a worse place where you're having a harder time dealing with or adjusting or reconciling that challenge.
Let's impact some men today. I think we're going to do a great job.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Man Podcast, where we connect men in pursuit of their potential. Join us as we embrace discomfort, cultivate community, and put wind in each other's sails. Now, before we jump in, I want to encourage you to like, subscribe, and share this podcast. And for the men listening, if you're serious about your growth, consider joining the Noble Knights men's community. It's where you can find support, accountability, and mentorship to achieve your goals. And join us to become a part of a community of like-minded men on a mission to improve themselves and elevate their capacity for life. I'm excited because we are getting some wind in our sails today from my guest, who is a retired Marine Corps pilot turned veteran trauma and addiction recovery expert. It's a pleasure to have Garret Biss joining me on the episode today. Garret, thank you for being on.
Hey, I'm so grateful to be here. I've been really looking forward to this, so I'm excited to dig into some conversations. Who thought a couple of dudes would be talking into microphones about authenticity and about all the feelings and the stuff that comes up and ways that we can navigate that to lean into and to really express our highest potential. So I'm excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, absolutely. If you would have told high school Ted or even 22-year-old Ted, 24-year-old Ted, you'd be on a podcast just talking about guys, expressing their feelings and themselves and getting honed in on their emotions, I would have thought you were crazy. I would have been like, man, get out of here, order another drink. What are you doing?
That's right.
But here we are. And oftentimes it's the experiences of life that takes us where we never thought we would go. So before we jump in, I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to speak to the audience directly, introduce yourself in your own words so they can get acquainted with you. And then we can jump into some of our conversation and subject matter. But please, the floor is yours, man. I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
I like it. I appreciate it. So, Garret Biss, I was a retired Marine Corps pilot. I am a retired Marine Corps pilot. So, I served in the Marines until 2015. And unfortunately, as I transitioned out of the Marine Corps, I entered a very dark period of my life. And I said, it's unfortunate that it wasn't rare. There's so many veterans that when they transition out of the service, they go through this really dark period of trying to figure out, what's this new landscape that I'm a part of? And most importantly, I think, who am I? So for you look at when somebody joins the military, 18 to 22 years old, really your sense of self is still being developed. Heck, your brain is still developing to fully utilize the functionality of your brain with our prefrontal cortex, our ability to understand things, discern meaning from things. All that's still being formed in uniform. So when you take that uniform off, if it's after 4 years or after 30 years, there's a tremendous shift and an identity crisis and an existential crisis that all takes place in that transition. And for me, my experience or my journey through that was very similar to a lot of veterans when they transition out. There was a void inside, and I found a way to numb the void inside or to deal with some of the pain that was coming up, and was really trying to figure out, okay, I know who Captain Biss was, but who the heck's this Garret Biss guy? What are the things that are important to me? What are the things that I want? And in this journey, also, like, what the heck is this weight that I'm carrying? What is this pain or what is this void that is inside of me? Where did it come from? Fortunately, I found some great coaching to help me through that and to help me rebuild my sense of self-worth and self-identity and find some meaning and purpose in my life. But all along through that journey, I was constantly looking back, like, what the heck was that monster that I was just battling with back there? And then as I got more into the addiction recovery space and started working with other veterans, I realized that the stories that they were sharing and the struggles and the battles they were going through were very similar to my own, which made me really curious. What is it about that military transition that creates such a hard period? And one of the things I shared with you, and I encourage people to go watch, is I recently did a TEDx talk, and it's called "The Unspoken Trauma that All Veterans Face," and what that unspoken trauma is, that transition out of military service. One thing that I became really familiar with and was really kind of close home to me was some fundamental needs that we lose, or the way that we meet some fundamental needs, is changed or ripped away from us as we transition out. And what I've come to appreciate is that these fundamental needs, first and foremost, is for connection. So we have a biological need for connection. We're hardwired for connection. A lot of our emotional processes are all fueled by our ability to deal with stress and overcome challenges. All of that is promoted by or helped by the connections that we have. But connection isn't enough. Connection is certainly a big element of it. But one of the challenges that we face is connection is such a real and such a fundamental need. If you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those basic survival needs at the bottom, they require our connection to a tribe, to a group. The challenge is, if we have connection, but we sacrifice our authenticity to gain or to maintain connection, then it's not really fulfilling a need, and it's not creating that foundation. Instead, it's ripping us down in a way, or it's creating a bigger wound inside. One of my favorite quotes is by an author, and man, she's the name's skipping me right now, but the quote is essentially that the reward for conformity, the reward for showing up as we're expected to show up, or the reward for wearing masks to show up as a version of ourselves that will be accepted, the reward for this conformity is that everyone will love us and accept us except for ourselves. And that's
Mhm.
really the challenge that I felt. And that's what the experience that I had. Because as I transitioned out of the military, as I lost that connection, and now I was vying to find a new tribe, to find a new group, to find out, what that identity again, like who am I? Where do I belong? I also found that there were certain things about me that didn't seem to really they weren't really coherent with this new tribe that I was trying to be a part of. There's some strange things about veterans. We're certainly cut from a different cloth. The values, the beliefs, the way that we see things, the way that we address things, the dark sense of humor, all of these things sometimes can be a little abrasive when you're trying to find new connections and trying to find that new tribe. So what I found myself doing, and what a lot of veterans do, is we start to hide parts of ourselves. We start to
Mm.
cover up things, or we start to present ourselves in a way that we think is expected of us, so that we can maintain that connection, or we can get that sense of belonging back. Well, the challenge is, as individuals are connecting with these masks that we're wearing, is they're not connecting with us. So that connection that we're yearning for, and what we're trying to gain, that fundamental human need that we have for connection, we're not satiating it, and we're not filling that void or filling that need for connection. And it's not as bad as just not having that connection. So like if we're hungry and we need food in order to satiate that hunger, if we have a need for connection, and yet we're trying to fulfill or satiate that need by wearing these masks and trying to gain new connections, not only do we not gain that connection, but through this process of showing up as an inauthentic version of ourselves, wearing these masks, showing up as we feel that we're expected, it's also sending a signal to us, and it's reaffirming this belief or this fear that somehow we're not good enough just as we are. So
Uh,
not only do we not get the connection, but we're really punishing ourselves and wounding ourselves more with this repeated expression, or this evidence now that I can't be who I am because that person's not acceptable. I need to be something else. And that really tears our sense of self-worth, our sense of value, and creates a tremendous void inside of us.
man, there's so much there. And I know a lot of the listeners are gonna have to go back and listen to that again because you said so much valuable stuff. But I sum it up as if we pretend to be somebody that's accepted,
Mm,
we still don't feel accepted because the person accepted still isn't us.
right.
And it's just like you said, it further builds that void of the lack of acceptance and the lack of feeling like you belong. And then that ends up draining us. And I understand, I call them the social contracts that we have in public
Mhm.
spaces, right? There's a certain amount of social contracts that you have to abide by when you're in a public area or you're at work or things like that. But that's why sometimes being isolated or being with those closest to you, those friends that you call, you haven't spoken to for years, but you pick up the phone like nothing have like you spoke yesterday. You're cracking the same jokes. You feel like yourself. You know, you could
That's right.
metaphorically let your hair down and be your true self, and you know you're accepted with this friend because they get it or they get you. Um, but something you started with, and I want to touch on it because I know how going out there's that identity crisis, but you so eloquently described how oftentimes for people getting into the military, they're not fully developed yet, and it almost helps build who they become. So I'm interested to know before we get to a point of coming back into that civilian world and being like, Okay, what is going on?" I first want to go back and identify what is it the military gives you or gave you per se. You could speak from your personal experience when you entered into the Marines, became a pilot. What was it that was given to you in that process?
Yeah, so a lot of things, there's a lot of situations, a lot of beautiful things, and I'm not here. I'm not suggesting that anything about who I became or who I was as a military service member is good or bad. It was appropriate and it suited a certain context, but as that context changes, or as your role or as your identity changes, then there can be some challenges. But there are certain things that are, in that are conditioned into us. Maybe that's not a, maybe that has a more of a negative connotation, but are some of our growth that has helped inspire to be able to function in the high stress, very high stakes environment or role that we have. So some of the things that maybe are a little different, or some things that I've seen about myself and about veterans that are different, is we develop a vigilance and a very high sense of situational awareness, attention to detail, because these are traits and these are things that really help us and serve us in situations, in very high stress, high stakes situations. Another thing is that we often are trained to or encouraged to see everything and make every decision in the context or in the framing of life or death. So we'll make decisions on, am I going to put this extra thing in my pack? Are we going to go this way? Are we going to do this thing? Am I going to spend some extra time training? Are we going to train on emergency procedures more? Because it's very, in a very real likely scenario that these decisions that we make today in training or in development are going to make the difference from a matter of life or death sometime in the future. Now, whether somebody ever goes forward and they go forward deployed and those situations happen, we're trained from the very beginning to see everything as a matter of life or death. So this is a level of intensity that many other people are not as familiar with. So that's just one example. And then whether it's that attention to detail, whether it's the mission mindset, the orientation of working together with a group and having somebody else's back, and maybe working with and inspiring your peers, not even those that you're leading or those that are leading you, but those people that are around you, inspiring everybody to be a little bit better, because your growth and your advancement and your gain of strength or skills is something that's going to influence, help, and support everybody else that's around you. So there's a real sense of ownership and a real sense of pride there with that development. So these are certainly things that are encouraged into us, or are are developed in us in the military, and sometimes they don't mix so well after the fact. Again, it's nothing that's good or bad. It's just the reality that if you take somebody, you take an NFL player that's trained his entire life to be a really good NFL player, and then you take him to be a used car salesman, maybe there's some traits that like don't really align. It's not to say that it was good or bad. It's just like in that scenario. And this is something that I've really begun to understand. I'm most familiar with the military transition and what that experience looks like, but I also understand, as we come back and we look at this transition through the lens of that connection and the lens of the authenticity. And the third thing that I haven't mentioned yet is the sense of meaning. Anybody going through a transition in life might experience some version of this. If you've lost that connection, if you've lost your place, your sense of belonging, maybe you're moving across the country, maybe you graduated college and now you're trying to find your way in the workforce, or maybe you're retiring. These are big, major transitions. And if we can look at it through that lens of connection, if we can understand the vital role of authenticity, and we can understand, how to derive meaning, or where that sense of meaning comes from, and the importance of meaning and purpose in our life, then we can help better understand, maybe prepare for those transitions, but also deal with some of the ramifications or some of the challenges that we face after those transitions.
Yeah, and maybe even properly mourn the loss of that prior identity, right? If I'm no longer that NFL player, I can't come into the used car lot spiking keys. That's going to be
Right.
frowned upon. But it's understanding that that NFL player who I was in that arena and on the
Mhm.
field served me very well, and those skills and talents, they might not be as they might not be as applicable in this new arena, but what I learned there is still
Mm.
valuable. And it's baffling because I've said this so many times. Things that you mentioned, the resilience, the team mindset, the encouraging others to succeed, the attention to detail, the situational awareness. If I were a CEO looking for the type of staff, those are the traits I would want in my staff. And And it's hard that it doesn't always feel as though those traits that have become they or the intensity that have become part of some of who we are isn't
Mm,
necessarily felt as though it's accepted, and that could be hard to transition, as you've mentioned. And I actually pulled up a study. It says the study by the Journal of the Traumatic Stress in 2022 found that veterans who struggle with reintegration into civilian life experience higher levels of PTSD and depression, even if they never face direct combat trauma.
mm.
The study suggests that loss of identity, lack of structure, and a diminished sense of purpose are key contributors to veterans' mental health struggles.
If iron sharpens iron, so does one man sharpen another. But if you're a man and you're alone or listening to this, then who sharpens you? What's going on, guys? Ted Phaeton here, host of the Modern Man Podcast, also founder of the Noble Knights Mastermind Group. And I'm just out here encouraging you to find your circle. Maybe you're on a personal growth journey and nobody around you understands the new mentality that you're possessing. That's okay. You can find an online community that will pour into you, will navigate your goals and navigate your obstacles, share their experiences, resources, and more. Join the Noble Knights Mastermind Group and try us out for free to tap into a community of men helping each other scale up and reach their goals.
Check out themodernmanpodcast.com. What was it like for you as you transitioned out of the military? You mentioned, okay, you know who Captain Biss is, but now who is Garret Biss? What was that experience and journey like for you?
Well, it really kind of there was some stress even leading up to that point because as I realized that my retirement was coming and I knew that my whole life was going to change, I was comfortable and I was confident in my ability to be a Marine. I knew that I had done well there. I'd gotten promotions, gotten awards for and was recognized for my contribution there in that role. But even before I retired, I didn't know if that was going to translate into the civilian world. I was still kind of curious about that. And then when that transition happened, I noticed I was just in that constant like fight or flight state. Like there was this void inside. I didn't really understand it, and I have a much better understanding of it now. And not knowing where that pain was, and this is something I express a lot, and this is really why I deliver that message on the TEDx talk about the unspoken trauma that all veterans face. If you're in a painful situation and you don't know how you got there, it can be really hard to understand or have faith that things are going to get better. So if you or I went to the gym today and we worked out and we threw down, we were hitting PRs and we're like really pushing, and for the next couple of days our muscles were sore, well, that would make sense to us. We're like, yeah, no kidding. Like my muscles are rebuilding. There's going to be some soreness, but because we understood why, like the path that we took to that soreness and to that pain, we would also understand, okay, it's going to get better, and in a couple of days, this pain will go away. If you find yourself instantaneously in that dark place and you're feeling all this internal void and you're really struggling and you don't really understand how you got there, it can be hard to have faith that things are going to get better. And part of that for me was processing this thought that maybe this is the best that it gets. Maybe I'm just so defective. Like maybe whatever that value that I had is now taken away, and I'm so defective that this is the state that I've got to get used to now. But on that transition, to your point that you're making with that transition, I think there's two really important things to understand. One is what are those values? What are the skills? What are the things that you had before? If we're looking at that NFL player, like that 315-pound bench press, that quick run time, what was it that helped you achieve that? Because though that skill or that trait might not necessarily be translatable or transferable to a new role, there's something deeper inside of you that helped you get that. It was the discipline, it was that fortitude, it was that the continuous process or the progress that you went through over and over to get to that place and to develop these skills. You can still capture that same fortitude, that same discipline, and develop different skills. So maybe you lost a particular tool from your toolbox, but it doesn't mean that you can't create it the same way that you did. So that's one thing. And the other big thing to understand is that these values and these skills that you present that help you with your sense of worth and your sense of belonging, if you lose that, that's not a reflection of you. That's not saying that now you have no value. And that's a big challenge that I personally dealt with, and I think a lot of veterans do, or a lot of people in transition do, just because of the way that you showed up and the way that you provide value before isn't as translatable to the new present. That doesn't mean that you're worth less as an individual, or that you have less value as an individual. And that's something that's really important to hold on to and to remember as you're going through that transition.
Yeah, and Value, purpose, mission. I think those are universal truths that so many of us seek. And for so many people who never entered the military, I've heard them. They'll say it as in, "I don't know what my passion is."
Mm,
I just don't know what my passion is, and they feel unfulfilled in a day job. Um, I could imagine the pain of, well, like, I had what I was good at, and I
right,
had what I was effective in, and I fit very well into this system, and also when you see the output of compounding effort, it's an amazing thing. It's
right,
a wonder of this world when you see it's like, look what we did together, and then it becomes okay. Then now what do I do with with what's left, right?
right.
It's almost my favorite poem. I've said it on this podcast multiple times. If poem by Rudyard Kipling, but one of the lines says, if you can stoop and build your life with new beginnings with worn out tools, right? And it's the thought of, you're not starting from scratch, you're starting with experience,
Right.
but we just need to build something a little different. Um, what was it for you that you found that started turning the lights on, right? You mentioned finding yourself in that dark place. And I want to reach any of the listeners, anyone watching on YouTube or listening in their car while driving who could resonate with this. And they might be thinking to themselves, Garrett, man, that unspoken trauma, that darkness, I'm sitting in it right now. And I don't know the why, but I'm looking for the light and I don't know how to get there. What were some of the things that helped you turn things around that any of our listeners can maybe benefit and get value from?
Yeah, I love that question. So one thing, and this has really been something that I've become to appreciate more and understand a little bit more in the many years since that transition happened. And as we were talking right before we recorded, what I've really come to appreciate and understand the importance of is authenticity. So as we talked about, you can't have true, fulfilling, and nurturing connection without authenticity. I feel that we challenge our authenticity, we lose it, we sacrifice it for so many ways or at so many times throughout our life. And that divergence from who we authentically are and our true self and this version of ourself that we're showing up as, the delta between those 2 points, I believe is where all pain, suffering, and if we dug into it and research it, I'm sure we'd find all manifestations of disease and unhappiness and fear and anger and hatred. I think they all come from that place. So for me, my journey back was with some of the coaching and the mentoring that I got was first fostering a connection with myself, first getting to understand who I am. Like, what are my values, beliefs? What are the things that I'm passionate about? Maybe not even professionally, but like, what are the things? When do I feel like I'm in flow? When do I feel just happy? And recognizing these things, and then reconnecting not only with those things that are authentic, sources of joy for myself, but reconnecting with who I am as an individual and the value and the worth that I have. I feel if we don't recreate this foundation, if we don't connect with who we are and the wins and successes and the strengths that we've had in our life, then we're bringing a tattered version of us to these new connections that we're trying to foster. And through that path, I think it's a game that you'll never win if you don't first reconnect with yourself. And there's a lot of ways, from physiological, mental, mindset ways to reconnect with yourself, but I think first and foremost, that's the most important place to begin. Reconnect with yourself, begin to gain a sense of authenticity, begin to feel permission to share your authenticity. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, yeah, well, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to show or express your authenticity? I understand authenticity as your permission to share what you feel and ask for what you need without fear that it's going to cost you your connections. And when we can get to that place, when we can have strong connections, strong bonds, a sense of, the sense of belonging, and we feel that we can share what we're thinking and how we feel, or the things that we fear or the wants that we have, and not fear loss of that connection, that's the place that we should try to get to. Because when we can step forward, when we can remove the masks that we're wearing and step forward as we are, letting go of the social and societal expectations of us or how we're supposed to show up, the more that we can show up as we truly authentically are, that's the foundation for creating this life and for really leaning into our potential. if we're, was it Marley, the guy in the Christmas Carol, movie or the books where he shows up with all these chains and all this baggage behind him? I feel like that's us picking up these masks and picking up these external expectations and putting them on us. And of course, when you're bringing that version of yourself that is so held down by all these things and all this weight, trying to lean into and trying to express your potential is almost like a wasted effort. You've got all these things that you're bringing along that is preventing you from expressing your true potential. Or you're going down a path of social expectations, trying to express your potential in something that you don't really care about. It's not something that kind of fills up your cup. And that's one way that I've started to think about authenticity is and this lens through with which we could look at opportunities or look at things that we want to get involved in, whether it's opportunities to go experience something or opportunities, professionally, business wise. If this opportunity, as you think about it, or as you engage in it, is filling a void and kind of numbing a pain, well, that's an indication that it's not something that's authentically right for you. If this opportunity or this thing that you're engaged in is healing a hole that's inside of you and helping you feel more whole, lovable, and acceptable just as you are with what you have and grateful for the things that are around you, then that's an indication that this is something on your authentic path that you should pursue or investigate.
Mm. I feel as though you mentioned the situational awareness, this understanding self that really boils
Mm,
down to making that determination, and something you mentioned before about the mission, right? And I mean, I hear, and at least for me, where I'm at in my life, the mission is me.
mm,
I'm working on self each and every single day, whether it's time in isolation or articulating my feelings better with my wife, or as you mentioned, articulating my boundaries, what I want, what I don't want, saying no when I don't want something, and feeling confident in doing so without the risk of lost relationship, that authenticity. It was because of the mission of me, of
mm,
understanding and becoming better along the way. And that is something that could just, I don't want to say become addicting, but it's something that because becomes foundational in our approach to life. It's so much so where research from Frontiers in Psychology 2021 highlights that some veterans experience post-traumatic growth instead of PTSD, using adversity as a catalyst for personal development. The study found that coaching, peer support, and purpose-driven initiatives significantly improve veterans' post-service mental health. You mentioned mentors. You mentioned the coaching that you received to help you find that authenticity. We might have heard about PTSD. This is actually preparing for this interview is the first time I heard getting introduced to you about PTG. Talk more about that post-traumatic growth and how that could be the catalyst that many veterans might be looking for.
Yeah, this is a great question. And this is honestly something we could probably do a whole episode on because it is so important and it's not talked about enough. I mean, PTG, that's not even in our common vernacular. Everybody can talk about PTS, post traumatic stress, PTSD. Sadly, I've given a lot of presentations and I do a lot of training with mental health professionals. And I'll do a survey of the room before I talk about this topic. And I'll say, raise your hand if you've ever heard of post traumatic growth. And sadly, less than half of the room will raise their hand. It's like, hold on. So you're telling me that you work every day with people that have experienced trauma and are dealing with the symptoms of PTSD and post traumatic stress. And yet you don't even know that there's an opposite side to the coin of post traumatic growth. I mean, that's very unfortunate. Like if you don't know that it's a potential outcome. So let's step back a little bit. So I'm not a clinician, and my layperson's understanding of trauma and how I understand it and articulate it is I understand trauma to be any event or circumstance that a person experiences, which creates a fundamental shift in their values, their beliefs, or their understanding of themselves and their place in the world. So, for example, somebody might get into a car or a vehicle and they're traveling to the store and maybe they experience a horrific car accident and a loved one that was in the car with them passes away. That could be a traumatic experience because that person before that experience, they lived in a world where you could generally get in a car, you could drive around, you could feel safe, you didn't have to worry about losing a loved one or something horrific happening. And now from that day forward, they've been shown that that belief isn't always valid. And I believe a lot of the challenge that comes that creates these symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder or PTS is an inability to reconcile this life that I was living in before and this world that I was living in before and this new world that I find myself. And that can come down to this fear of, okay, there's this one value or this one belief that I had about the world and about how things work that was proven false. What other values am I hanging on that might also be false? And that can create a lot of disassociation and a lack of coherence, which creates some of those symptoms and the fear and the hypervigilance and a lot of the other challenges that people face. So back to that definition of trauma, this understanding of trauma, it creates a fundamental shift in the values, beliefs, or understanding of the world. Nowhere in there is it suggested that that shift has to be a negative one or something that creates a negative symptoms as a result of. There also is the possibility that you experience something. It creates a fundamental shift in your values, your beliefs, your understanding that leads to a better place. It's not just a return to baseline, but it's actually an improvement, not despite, but because of the traumatic experience that somebody faced. Somebody could have a heart attack and then they realize, man, these values that I have about the things that I put in my body and my lack of exercise, like that's not okay. I was just proven that that's not leading down a good road. And then they create a fundamental shift in the way that they value their health and the things that they'll do for themselves. So that could be an example of somebody who had a post-traumatic growth from something that was traumatic or could be traumatic. One of the things that they find is closely associated or tied to whether somebody has PTSD or they go down that potential road of post-traumatic growth is the meaning that they tie or associate to that traumatic event or experience. If you can associate a meaning to it, like like a gentleman who had a heart attack, like, man, that means that's a wake up call and I better make some changes. And I'm grateful for this because, man, I was going to go down that road and it wasn't going to be a pretty place. And they come maybe even to a place of gratitude for the heart attack 5 years later when their whole, lifestyle and their whole health has been transformed. If they can correlate a positive meaning to that experience, then this is something that opens that door for the post-traumatic growth potential. And what I've found, humans are meaning seeking creatures. And when we see something or experience something, we always want to understand, what's that mean? What's that about? I find if somebody can't come up with a meaning for that traumatic experience, many times we'll revert to a default meaning, like a filler, meaning that bad things just happen or somehow, some way I just deserve that traumatic experience in my life. And if that's the meaning of that experience that you come away with, of course, it's going to lead you to a worse place where you're having a harder time dealing with or adjusting or reconciling that challenge. So meaning is extremely important. And then also what I understand about meaning, and if you have a mission, usually it's in alignment with a sense of meaning or with some priorities in your life. There's some meaning that you derive out of pursuing that mission. I understand mission. I always knew it of meaning as something that was, it could provide direction. It felt good when we're doing something with a sense of meaning. But what I've come to understand more recently is that meaning, its most profound or maybe fundamental value in our life is that when we have a strong sense of meaning, it also provides our capacity to endure suffering. We can endure hardship. We can endure suffering. We can endure pain if it's in the pursuit of something that's meaningful. If you lose that sense of meaning, like a lot of veterans lose when they get out of the military, this thing that they were involved in provided such a profound sense of meaning, getting to go forward and do difficult things in pursuit of protecting those that we love at home. That's a profound sense of meaning that comes from that. If you lose that sense of meaning, you've also lost with it the capacity to endure the hard times that life is going to continue to bring. So not only are you losing that, that wind in your sail that's carrying you forward, but you're also losing the capacity to even stay afloat. So as these challenges begin to bottle up, or as these challenges come up, and that's something I think about a lot with coaching and with mentoring, you got to understand what's meaningful in your life. You got to find and align yourself with something that's meaningful, not just because it's going to make you happier, though it will, but because it's going to allow you to show up as a better version of yourself and really use your full capacity to endure the hardship that you're going to face on your path to something that's worth pursuing. I'm sure that your discipline and your self-discovery and your focusing and your mission to develop yourself also brings with it some suffering. There's things that you have to avoid. There's hardships that you invite upon yourself in order to do things. There's difficult conversations that you're willing to have because it's so meaningful. You have the capacity to endure those hardships.
Yeah, like me jumping in my ice barrel, and everyone's like, "Why would you jump in freezing cold
That's
weather?"
right.
And I'm just like, Victor Franklin, he who knows his why can endure anyhow. Get in here,
That's right.
and
That's
that's what
it.
we drive towards is finding that meaning and pushing forward. Because as you mentioned, it is a dangerous and such a dark place when we lose connection with that meaning. We lose
Mhm.
connection with the why in which we operate, we do things, or why we get out of bed. Suddenly, the covers feel so heavy and our feet can't
Yeah.
get off the ground, and it just becomes hard to open the door, which feels like the heaviest weight known to man. And it becomes hard to lift something like a pen to write, but it does become easy to grab something like a substance or a website,
Mhm. Yeah.
or drink an adult beverage. And that's where the addiction side comes in, and unfortunately those become our crutch, things that we lean on. I want to talk more about some of the addiction recovery and the coaching that you can offer for someone who might have a grasp on a particular substance or habit versus their meaning. How can we
Mhm.
let go of this one thing that we're holding on to so much, that's slowly killing us or deteriorating us or not serving us, and grab hold of this thing that can give us so much value, which is that meaning? How
Yeah.
can we make that transition?
Yeah, that's a great question. And before I unwrap that, I want to just bring authenticity into this talk about meaning. So I think we'll find the greatest sense of meaning when the daily actions and pursuits that we have are in alignment with our authentic self. There's a lot of ways that we can occupy our time. There's a lot of tasks that we can do. There's a lot of jobs and work that we can do. If that's if that's draining you, if that's not lifting you up and exciting you, then doing those painful things isn't going to be as easy to overcome. However, if we can find jobs and pursuits and things that are in alignment with our sense of meaning, which with our authentic, with our authentic self and what's important to our authentic self, that's what brings our daily actions and the grind or the stretching and the growth. That's what makes those things more fulfilling and not taking us down or draining us, which can lead into, if we are constantly engaged, if we're grinding, if we're putting everything that we have into what we've got, and we feel this void inside, or we're just like, man, like, I don't know, I'm just exhausted, I can't keep going on. That's a big indicator to us that our actions every day and the pursuits that we're involved in aren't aligned with our authentic sense of self, and therefore not driving that meaning. And the result is that it creates a void inside of us. One of my favorite definitions of what addiction is by Dr. Gabor Mate. He says addiction can manifest in any behavior that a person craves, finds temporary relief or pleasure in, has a negative consequence as a result of, and yet has difficulty giving it up. So addictions can certainly manifest in some substances, whether it's the more socially acceptable substances like alcohol or like food, or other substances which aren't as socially acceptable, or any behavior, whether it's gambling, whether it's porn, whether it's shopping, whether it's just, sleeping or Netflix binging. There's all these behaviors. And if it's something that provides us temporary relief of pain, well, that's the clue. That's the indicator right there. Where's the pain coming from? And that's the sure pathway to moving beyond and starting to create a life that you can let down some of these distractions or these compulsive behaviors that are creating this consequence. Figure out where the pain's coming from and begin to fill that void with that pain. And that's what it comes back to. How I said, if there's a certain pursuit or an opportunity or an activity that you have the chance to engage in, if it feels like it's filling a void inside of you and helping you numb some of the pain of that void, then that's an indicator that it's not something that's in pursuit of that mission or that thing that's more authentic to you. If it feels like I've got this void inside, and if I do this thing, if I do this opportunity, if I befriend this person, it's now starting to heal that hole that's inside of me, then that's a great indication of something that you should lean into.
You mentioned those indicators and going down that process. If we're meeting somebody in their darkest day, that we're meeting somebody in the thick of their addiction, their habit, what are the first steps that you offer them? What would be the first course of action for someone to take if they're sitting here thinking like, man, I can't stop going to this website. The food in my fridge. I go shopping. I have all the processed food. It just makes me forget
Mhm.
about my day, and I'm watching Netflix. I can't stop that. What's the first step this person takes?
So if you're approaching that person, or if this is somebody that you're working with, or a friend or a loved one, one of the first things that we can do to really put us in a position to help that individual is showing up as with as much compassion and as little judgment as possible, and providing a space where they can begin to express their authenticity. What are those things that they're afraid to say? What are those things that they're afraid to share? What are the needs that they have that they've never wanted to ask for? Because when you can provide that space, then it allows this person to start to converge back to who they authentically are. Maybe they don't even know. Maybe they've been bottling that up and pushing it away so long that they don't even know. They just know that they're dealing with a void inside. So to build that rapport and to actually build a relationship where you can serve or support that individual, it first needs to start with creating a safe place where they can be as authentic as possible. Share the craziest things that have ever come up in their mind, share their craziest fears, maybe tell you about that thing they did 20 years ago, maybe the traumatic experience that they lived through. Maybe they were assaulted or raped and they never wanted to share it with somebody because they thought they might be looked at differently because of it. Create a space where they have permission and they feel safe sharing that, because that, once we can take some of these things, some of our secrets out and not experience rejection. I think that's the biggest reason that we hold, some things, some secrets back, or we wear these masks. We're afraid if we express them, if we allow them to see the light of day, or if we take off that mask, that we'll be rejected. Demonstrate to them that no matter what they share with you, they're not rejected and they're still lovable and acceptable in your eyes. Because the truth is, and this is a foundational belief that I always come back to, I believe that every individual at any time with whatever they're doing the best that they can at the time with the level of awareness, the energy, the capacity to act in that moment. And maybe that was a bad thing. Maybe they've done something against you. Maybe they betrayed you. But I really believe that everybody's doing the best that they can. And if you can see that, and if you can use that lens at least to look at an individual who has gone down a bad path, and you can just see that, hey, really at the end of the day, there's a hurt child inside that's had some wounds and experienced some hard things throughout their life, and they're acting the best that they can to fulfill some basic human needs at this point. If we can bring that level of compassion and understanding to an individual, then that's the very first step. Now, as an individual, one of the most important things to do is to reconnect with the parts of us that are valuable. If you really have been struggling for a period of time, especially with an addictive substance or behavior, a lot of times you're creating so much shame and so much self-doubt, and we see the worst parts of ourselves, and these seem to be the memories that we carry forward as a self-protective measure. And I understand, that part of the way that we're hardwired. If I made a mistake yesterday, I'm going to ruminate over that, and that's going to be a tab that's open in my brain for weeks or months to come. Unfortunately, well, and a little bit, the reason that we do that, it's a self-protective measure. If I were to make that mistake again, that could have additional consequences, and I don't want to repeat that. So I'm going to carry this with me in my consciousness, my awareness. Unfortunately, when we have a win, when we do something great, when we demonstrate a strength that we have, when we've provided value, that's not going to become a future threat. So we tend to discount, or we'll close that tab and forget about it. Well, if we continue to lean forward and we're just opening up all these tabs of the defects that we have, and the times that I ate more than I wanted to, or the times that I drank and I shouldn't have, and all these mistakes that we've made, if those are the only tabs that we have open in our mind, of course you're not going to feel great about yourself. Many people don't even feel, a lot of the people I've worked with, they don't even feel that they're deserving of happiness or joy in their life. They think that, they're just like welcoming on more consequences because they feel so bad about who they are and have so much shame. So one of the first steps, and I walk all my clients through this, is first let's sit down and let's make a list of 100 wins or successes that you've had in your life. And it's usually, if somebody's in a really dark place, it's like deer in the headlights look. They're like, what are you talking about? I'm like 40. I don't have 100 wins or successes. Well, that's a litmus test, or that's a key indicator to me of like how bad of a mindset or how bad of a place that they're in. Because I don't care how many things you've messed up in your life. You've had 100 wins, or you've had tens of thousands of wins and successes along the way. We need to reconnect with the memories of that and give ourselves value for it, give ourselves credit where credit is due, because this helps us start to regain a sense of the value and the self-worth that we have. And when we have greater sense of value and self-worth, then it also gives us a little bit more ability to do things that are good for us. If I feel like crap and I think I'm the worst person ever and I deserve all the pain and suffering, then why not sit down and eat a couple tubs of ice cream? Or why not, just Netflix binge and not pursue an advancement in my career? If we start to value ourselves, then you know what? I'm going to make a good decision for myself because I deserve it. And that can be a great pathway or a great course correction to get to a better place.
Yeah. Oh man, that's fantastic. I have my daily discipline. I resonate with that because every day I'll write down in my planner not just what I got to do and everything, but there's the reflection side where it says three things I'm grateful for, and I think to
Yeah.
myself, there's times I'm grateful for sleep. There's times I'm grateful for. Today I literally wrote, Garrett. I said I am thankful for heat because it is brick outside, and I am
Yeah.
so grateful that I don't have to sit in the cold. But those are the things that reshape that things that I'm thankful for. And then it says, what can I do to make today great? And then what can I improve on? Because it's about moving
Mm,
forward. But looking back and seeing those wins, the winning streak, right? Because we
yeah.
either for those who are obliviously confident, they look back and see everything they did good and nothing was wrong. That's not true. The
Right.
other, they look back and they see everything they did wrong and nothing was good.
Yeah.
That's also not true. And we land somewhere
See the
in
little
between
typo
because
in that thing that you produce, and you're like, man, like I'm not
yeah,
going to look at the 99.5% of this thing that's amazing and is perfect. I'm going to look at that little comma or that extra S on that word that I didn't catch.
yep,
Well, I love
page
your reflection on
five.
the. Yeah, that's right. I love your reflection on the gratitude. And here I'll offer you something. I'll challenge you if you want to get more juice out of that squeeze. The gratitude is beautiful. I challenge you next time, or I invite you to write something that you're grateful for, and then acknowledge how you were involved in allowing that thing to be experienced. So you're grateful for the great night's sleep you got, and you allowed that to happen by shutting off your phone, at the right time, and by allowing yourself to get into bed. I'm grateful for the beautiful sunrise that I saw this morning, and I allowed that to happen by getting out. There's just something about that little subtle shift that really brings more awareness to the value and the capacity that we do have and our ownership of the life and what we're experiencing.
That's amazing. The effort that you put into the win helps you take part ownership of that thing that you're grateful for, which I can only imagine helps to boost in a positive way. And when you mentioned the acceptance and the love, right? In that process of coming to someone else without judgment and letting them know that they are still loved. You're so right because we can't heal what we don't reveal, and
Mm,
oftentimes we look for a safe place and we don't find that, and we might start opening up a little bit to our partner. There was a viral video and a gentleman sitting there with a coil on a metal bar. I don't know if you've seen this, and his wife's like, what's
mm,
wrong? He's like, my coil. He's like, I had this when it was up here and it's over here. And then she's like, oh, get out of here. And it's like, no, my man is saying something really deep here. here.
right.
But it gets shut down. So we look for that safe place. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, we don't always find it. And I can imagine that transition into civilian life for veterans could even be more difficult to find some of the environments where we feel safe and accepted. So one of my last questions would be, how can civilian communities better support veterans in their transition and mental health journey? What environments can we establish or set up, or if we encounter a veteran, which I haven't said it yet, was going to say it earlier on. Thank you for your service, by the way.
Thank you.
What can we do as a civilian community to help that transition?
Yeah, so great question. One of the first places to start would be go watch my TEDx talk. It's 10 and a half minutes. It's called The Unspoken Trauma That All Veterans Face. But it's a great way to have a better understanding. You might see somebody, a veteran who's struggling or a veteran that's in need, but if you can't understand maybe contextually what they might be going through, then this is a beautiful opportunity in a very short, format to better kind of understand that transition, maybe in a way that the veteran can't really understand. And then the second thing is just as we talked about, providing that safe place, helping a veteran feel safe to share what they're going through, understanding that they have this natural propensity to be putting on masks and trying to fit in and trying to find their new identity, being aware of that process and providing as much space as possible to allow them to express themselves and what's really going on. Not shunning them because they just told a joke that is so crazy you can't believe that that a person said it. Kind of understanding that journey that somebody's going through on the inside.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And for anybody who wants to learn more, or for anyone listening who resonates with your story and what you're talking about, and perhaps wants to reach out to find a listening ear, or they're a veteran themselves and they see themselves in you and they want to talk further, I'd love for them to have an opportunity. I want our audience to be able to reach out, connect with you, and get in touch. What are some of the best ways and avenues for them to do so?
Yeah, easy place to go is just my website, which is garrettbiss.com. I've got all my social links on there. I'm probably most active on LinkedIn, so that's a great place to reach out. And one thing I wanted to offer to all of your audience, whether you're a veteran or not, I've got this really quick, really simple program. It's called the Warrior Reset. And over the last 10 years, these are 4 daily practices that I found that can create the most fundamental shift or profound shift in the way that somebody feels emotionally, mentally, spiritually, in the way that they're showing up. So if anybody feels stuck, you feel like you stagnated, you realize it's the beginning of a new year, and you really want to allow your best self to shine so you can lean into your potential, go here. It's 4 different daily practices. You can do them all 4 of them in less than 15 minutes a day. It's called the Warrior Reset. And I'll give all your listeners free access to that if they go to thewarriorreset.com. And I'll share
Fantastic.
that with you. You can put it in the show notes.
I appreciate that. I will have it in the show notes before and have that ability for everybody to get that. Thank you for that gift. And Garrett, my last question, and it could be something we touched on already. It's usually the heaviest one, which is why I save it for last. And it's what is something you've seen or something that's happened to you that shapes the way you view the world as a man?
It's a great question. So, as a C-130 pilot in the Marine Corps, I had a beautiful opportunity to travel around the world a lot. And some of that travel was to amazing places in Europe and seeing some beautiful architecture and beautiful cultures and experiencing a lot of things. And some of that travel was to some very destitute and impoverished places around the world. And what this helped me see and understand is how diverse the human experience can be. For a human, one of us 8 billion living here on this planet, like the what that experience might look like is profoundly different. And also, what I've experienced, I do some mission work bringing water to third world villages and communities. What I've also found and really gotten in touch with is that we are, as humans, we have pretty much the same fundamental like wants, needs, desires, and fears. There's something that unites all of us together, and there's something that that we can learn from everybody. And that's something that I really appreciate. And it's helped me connect with people that I have vastly, diverse differences or diverse backgrounds or different experiences with, because I can't remember who quoted this. Maybe we can look it up and put it in the show notes. But there's something about no matter how much you dislike or disagree with the person, there's some way that they're better than you. And I think of this as like there's some way that I can learn from them in order to refine myself or become better myself. No matter how much you disagree with them, what side of the aisle they're on, what background, where they came from, whether it's somebody in a village in Africa or somebody in a village in Guatemala, or whether it's somebody that you meet in France or Chicago, there's something that you can learn from that individual. And we have the joint kind of contextual reference of these basic human needs that we want. We all want to be lovable, acceptable. We all want to feel like we're making a difference. We all want happiness and health for our friends and family and loved ones. We just have, because of the experiences that we've gone through, our nature and our nurture, we've come to different understandings of how to satiate those needs, but we're all looking to get to the same place.
Mm, amen to that. Garret Biss, retired Marine Corps pilot turned veteran trauma and addiction recovery expert. Thank you so much, not just for being on the show, sharing your knowledge, but sharing your authentic self and helping people who are listening wherever they are. You met them there, and I really do appreciate you being who you are and coming on the show today. So thank you.
I appreciate it. If I can just say one last thing for the audience as a parting
Please.
shot, no matter who you are, what you're going through, what demons you're facing, what struggles you're in, know that you are lovable and acceptable just as you are, that you have inherent value and inherent worth. And there's tools or there's mentors or there's coaches or there's something that can help guide you out of that place. Just know that you're lovable and acceptable and you deserve it. And I encourage you to kind of lean into it and get to that place of expressing your full potential in an authentic way.
Absolutely. And I'm going to double down on that and back you up on that, Garrett, so much so that if anybody doesn't feel that connection, you have Garrett's contact, you have my contact. Reach out to us because we would love to link up and let you know how lovable you are, because you are worth being seen and worth being accepted. And so thank you, Garrett. Thank you so much. I'm going to share some gems really quick because I know a lot of folks are either working out, driving while they're listening to the episode. But, what is this weight that I'm carrying? So many of us, whether it's transitioning out of the military or maybe getting retired or losing that title that you once had that you identified with, you end up having this weight that you're carrying, which is odd because you've subtracted something, but something feels heavier. And it might be hard, as Garrett mentioned, to identify where it came from if you can't right away identify the why. But your reward for conformity is everyone will accept you except for ourselves. Why pretend to be someone else that will be accepted, because you're still not going to be accepted anyway, and that does not fill the void in which you're looking for, which is that connection. Because we are wired for connection, we are wired for meaning as well. Hold on to your true self, find your authenticity, do the work of finding out who you are, finding the new mission, finding that meaning, and finding that purpose, aligning your actions with the meaning and the purpose. I wrote down in my notes the way you were describing it. I chummed it up as, I was built for this. Are you doing something every day that you feel that you were truly built for? And is that showing in your work? And where is the pain coming from? Oftentimes we have to sit with ourselves, or sit with someone else who creates that safe place so we can explore things together, and then show up with compassion, as little judgment as possible, and create that space for someone else if you are not going through the transition and you're looking to help somebody out. If you're looking to get help, reach out to myself, reach out to Garrett. Thank you again for your service. Thank you to the audience for making it to the end. I'm going to ask that if this resonated with you, you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button to get a new episode each and every single week. And if you have somebody in mind that needs to hear this episode, it would mean the world to us if you would share it with them as well, because they should hear the message that Garrett shared throughout this whole entire episode. As always, I thank you, and I'm going to ask that you leave us a rating to let us know how we're doing so we can improve for you. And finally, as I always say at the end of the episode, everybody wants the sunshine, but they don't want the rain. But you can't get the pleasure without first the pain. Let's grow.